Hey there. Tonight we stand beneath a sky that might not just shine upon us, but watch us with a patience beyond measure. For as long as we have looked upward, we have wondered who else might be looking back. It is one thing to imagine company among the stars. It is another to wonder if that company has already noticed us, and has been watching longer than we have walked upright on this earth. When Oumuamua swept through our solar system in 2017, scientists said it was likely a shard of rock from a distant place, tumbling without purpose across the void. But the way it moved unsettled me. Its angle, its sudden burst of speed, the strange way it reflected light. It all felt less like accident and more like design. I traced its path in old charts and saw intention where others saw coincidence. It had entered, lingered just long enough to pass by our sun, and then departed with a precision that looked almost surgical. I could not shake the thought, what if it had been sent here? And if so, by whom? The desert nights of Morocco have a way of stripping you down to silence. I remember standing there, looking up at stars that seemed less like fire and more like eyes. Cold, unblinking, endless eyes. I thought of Oumuamua, of the way it had come and gone without a word, and I felt small in a way no ruin or ocean had ever made me feel. If it was a machine, then it was not the first to pass us by, and it will not be the last. To be observed without knowing why, there is a cruelty in that silence. Children fear monsters not because of what they see, but because of what they cannot. In the same way, we stand now as children again, in the shadow of possibilities we cannot define. Perhaps these watchers are ancient beyond imagination. Their probes sent across eons before we could light a fire or carve a symbol into stone. If so, then our story is unfolded not in privacy, but always under their gaze. And I wonder what purpose such a gaze could serve. Curiosity, a search for resources, or something colder, a cataloguing, a record of life before it is erased. People tell me, if they meant harm they would have acted long ago. But what if patience itself is the weapon? To us decades feel long. To them, centuries may be the blink of an eye. An insect pinned beneath the glass is not crushed immediately. First, it is studied. History itself feels different once you allow this thought inside. The Sahara was once green, flowing with rivers and dotted with cities. Some endured. Others vanished as though erased with deliberate precision. I look at those deserts and cannot help but wonder if their disappearance was natural, or if it was the closing of an experiment. What if we are not the first to be watched? And what if the end of those forgotten peoples was less about drought or war, and more about conclusion? The unease deepened with 3i/Atlas, the second strange object from beyond our stars, arriving just 2 years after Oumuamua. The odds of such back-to-back encounters are staggering. To me it felt like a repetition, a reminder, another glance in our direction. I imagined them as eyes, black mirrors sliding silently past, drinking in our light, storing it, comparing it with other worlds catalogued long before ours. And so the question grows heavier, pressing into me with every passing night. If Earth is under surveillance, then the mystery is not whether we are seen, but why we are allowed to remain. No farmer stares at a field forever without harvesting. No predator shadows its prey endlessly without striking. What are we to them? Entertainment, data, or simply a test awaiting its end? The stars do not answer. Their silence is a curtain, heavy and deliberate, waiting for the final act to begin. And in that silence, one question lingers. What exactly have they been watching us for? The words return to me in quiet moments, curling around my thoughts like smoke that refuses to dissipate. I ask it when I walk through empty ruins, when I see abandoned cities where people once thrived, when I feel the hollow echo of history pressing against my skin. What could be the purpose of watching, endlessly, patiently across centuries? I remember holding an ancient map in a dim archive, its parchment brittle with age, its lines drawn with impossible precision. It showed coasts and rivers with a detail no civilization of its time should have known. Antarctica appeared not as the frozen wasteland we see today, but as land free of ice, flowing with rivers and valleys, knowledge that our own age only confirmed with satellites. How could such a map exist unless its creators had access to a perspective beyond Earth? Did they draw from imagination, or were they shown? The possibility shatters the boundaries of time. If maps older than our histories display knowledge they should not, then perhaps they are not inventions but copies. Copies of surveys taken by eyes not human, delivered to us as fragments, either by accident or design. The thought is as unsettling as it is electrifying. Were those cartographers unwitting archivists of another intelligence, transcribing glimpses of Earth through the gaze of watchers who had already measured it? The Sahara lingers in my mind again. Once lush, alive, filled with rivers and people, it is now an ocean of sand. Beneath the dunes, radar still traces the bones of rivers long buried, the remnants of civilizations whose stories are dust. The transformation was too sudden, too absolute. What if it was not just climate, but conclusion, the deliberate ending of a chapter in the experiment of life? What if the watchers decided that world was finished and closed it like a book? When I walk through libraries or museums, I feel a quiet unease. Knowledge preserved feels fragile, as though it survived not by chance but by allowance. The burning of Alexandria, the lost codices of the Mayans, the countless gaps in our recorded past, were these accidents of war and neglect or edits, revisions made by unseen hands. The watchers might not only observe but also curate, deciding what knowledge survives and what must be forgotten. Even the myths we tell shift beneath this suspicion. Floods that swallowed lands, fires that fell from the skies, gods descending to weigh and judge. Could these be echoes, distorted memories of watchers acting, their interventions preserved as stories? Perhaps those myths are less invention and more testimony, written not in science but in fear and awe. And what of the second object, 3I/Atlas, moving with a precision that Miradum are too closely to dismiss? Two interstellar visitors arriving in such short succession should not have happened by chance. Were they not wanderers, but instruments, reminders, eyes that checked on us as if to confirm that the experiment was still unfolding? The thought is unbearable, that our very progress, our wars, our inventions, may not be solely ours, but data points measured, weighed, and archived. The silence of the sky grows heavier when I carry these questions. Silence itself becomes a kind of speech, a deliberate withholding that forces me to fill the void with fear. If they are watching, then the absence of action is not mercy, it is patience. No predator strikes too soon, no farmer harvests too early. Waiting is part of the design. The weight of it settles deepest when I think of ruins. Stones cracked and scattered under centuries of weather seem suddenly less like random collapse and more like verdicts, delivered long ago. What if those ruins are not failures of humanity, but markers of decisions already made? Civilization studied, judged, and ended not by time but by something beyond it. If that is true, then we are not only the inheritors of history, but also the inheritors of surveillance. Every step we take, every city we build, every failure and every triumph may already be part of a record too vast for us to comprehend. And if it is a record, then we are not the writers, we are the subjects. Which leaves me with a thought that gnaws like teeth against the bone. If we are being observed so carefully, then perhaps the most important question is not what they are watching us for, but what they are waiting to do when the watching is complete. That question echoes through me like the toll of a bell, deep and resonant, impossible to silence. I carry it in crowded streets, in libraries filled with whispers of forgotten lives, even in the solitude of deserts where the wind scours the sand clean of human footprints. It is not simply a thought now. It feels like a presence, something placed within me by the very gaze I fear. I think of the maps again, those fragments of impossible knowledge, and how they seem less like inventions and revelations. What if the Watchers have always left their fingerprints, not as gifts, but as measures? By giving us glimpses of the world from angles we could not have attained, perhaps they wanted to see how we would use it. Would we hoard it, distort it into myths, or build upon it? Every ancient chart, every story of hidden lands could be not a mistake of history, but a breadcrumb trail deliberately laid to watch our response. When I stood among the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, the city's silence pressed down harder than the sun above. Skeletons lay in streets where life once thrived, but no war destroyed them. No fire swept through their homes. They had been halted mid-motion, as if a hand had struck down the city all at once. Theories speak of disease, of drought, but the deeper I looked, the less those explanations satisfied me. What if that silence was not natural at all, but imposed? What if the Watchers ended the experiment there, concluded it with precision, and then simply moved on? The same weight falls when I think of Göbekli Tepe, deliberately buried by its builders, hidden from sight as though concealing something too dangerous to leave exposed. Who buries a temple of such grandeur willingly, unless they feared not other men, but other eyes? Perhaps they felt the same awareness I feel now, that someone was watching, and that to survive certain truths needed to be hidden. But hidden from whom? From enemies on earth, or from those who watched from above? There is a cruelty in this thought that lingers at the edge of every question. If civilizations can be ended so completely, then survival is not a guarantee, but a conditional privilege. A privilege that may be withdrawn at any moment, without warning, without reason we can understand. And what terrifies me most is that such withdrawal would not look like punishment. It would look like accident, a famine, a storm, a shift in the Earth's axis. We would blame nature, never realizing nature itself was being used as a mask. I return often to the night skies. To most, stars are points of wonder, symbols of possibility. But to me, they have become apertures, as though the universe itself were a vast device filled with unseen eyes. Each one unblinking, each one cataloguing our progress, our failures, our smallest gestures of cruelty and kindness. If that is true, then we are not only a people, we are data, and data is never gathered without reason. Psychologists often speak of how behaviour changes when one knows they are observed. But what if the true test is how we behave when we suspect observation but cannot prove it? Perhaps this is why the Watchers remain silent, because their silence forces us into uncertainty, and uncertainty reveals the truest parts of our nature. Do we act with decency when we believe no one is watching? Or do we unravel, certain that our actions are unrecorded? Silence itself may be their greatest tool. And yet, another fear stirs deeper. What if the waiting is not for us at all? What if their surveillance is part of a larger pattern, one that stretches across countless worlds, countless civilizations, each observed in turn, until some greater decision is made? To them we may not be special, but one of many, one file among thousands in an archive too vast for us to imagine. If so, then what they are waiting for is not about us alone, but about the completion of a design that includes countless others. The weight of this thought is suffocating, for it means we may never truly understand what role we play. To us, our wars and achievements feel monumental. To them, they may be nothing more than entries in a ledger, notes in a catalogue. Our survival or erasure might matter less than we imagine, another line among billions written into the silence of the stars. And so I find myself asking again and again the question that will not let go. If they are waiting, then what is the moment they await? What sign, what threshold, what final act must occur before they decide our fate? The question gnaws at me endlessly, circling back no matter how far I try to push it away. It feels less like a curiosity and more like a warning, a pulse in the air that I can sense but cannot decipher. Perhaps the Watchers do not wait for anything dramatic at all. Perhaps the sign is already present, written in patterns too subtle for us to notice until it is too late. The thought grips me most fiercely when I think about our own thresholds. The moment when humans split the atom, An unleashed fire capable of ending worlds, was that not a signal? For the first time we held the power to erase ourselves entirely. If they were watching, perhaps they leaned closer then, waiting to see what we would do with such destructive knowledge. Would we wield it with caution, or scatter our survival into dust? Every mushroom cloud may not have been only a wound to the earth, but also a line drawn in their records. And then came another threshold, when we began to leave our planet. Our rockets rose like trembling arrows, fragile vessels carrying not only machines, but also the audacity of a species daring to step beyond its cradle. To us, it was progress. To them, was it trespass? Did our first steps into the heavens mark a moment they had long anticipated? The instant when the experiment reached for more than its boundaries? What do watchers do when the watched begin to climb the walls of their enclosure? It unsettles me to think that every civilization before us may have reached similar thresholds. Perhaps the people of forgotten ages built wonders not for gods, but for survival, to prove their worth to the eyes above. The sudden collapses of such civilizations, their abrupt silences, may not have been failures but responses, verdicts rendered when thresholds were crossed in the wrong way. I think often of the myths of fire falling from the skies, tales of gods striking down arrogance, of floods washing away corruption, of towers crumbling because they reached too high. They sound like allegories, but perhaps they are not. Perhaps they are memories of thresholds crossed and punishments delivered. If so, then what we call myths may be the recorded histories of the earlier judgments, softened into story so the survivors could bear them. Psychologically, this possibility weighs on me more than fear of destruction, for it means we live in a perpetual trial, every invention, every discovery, every choice a test. We are not free, not in the way we imagine. Even our greatest achievements may be nothing more than steps toward a predetermined threshold, one that will trigger a response we cannot prevent. And yet, I cannot ignore the darker possibility that the threshold has nothing to do with what we build, but with who we are. What if the Watchers are less concerned with our machines than with our morality? How we treat each other, how we respond to suffering, how we use or abuse the planet that cradles us. If that is true, then perhaps the threshold is not technological, but ethical. Perhaps the moment they await is when we reveal ourselves fully, not as creators of weapons or cities, but as a species defined by cruelty or compassion. This terrifies me most of all, because I see how often we fail that test. Greed consumes nations. Cruelty festers in silence. The earth itself groans under the weight of our neglect. If these are the qualities being measured, then what record are we writing? Are we proving ourselves capable of endurance, or are we confirming the same cycle of collapse the Watchers have seen countless times before? The silence of the stars feels sharper in this light. It is not empty, not indifferent, but deliberate, like the pause before a verdict is delivered, and in that silence I cannot escape the image of a scale balancing endlessly, waiting for the weight of our final act to tip it one way or the other. And so, the question cuts deeper still. What if the threshold they await has already been crossed, and we are simply living in the shadow of a verdict that has not yet been spoken? The words feel heavier the more I return to them, like an invisible weight pressing against the chest of history. If the threshold has already been passed, then what we call the present may be nothing more than the echo of a decision made long ago. We might not be waiting for judgment. We might already be living within it. I think of the ruins again, the silent remains of civilizations that once thrived with confidence and certainty, only to vanish with abrupt precision. The Indus Valley, where streets and houses were left intact but lifeless, as though emptied in an instant. The Minoans, shattered by fire and sea in ways too sudden to be explained by nature alone. To us they are mysteries, puzzles to be solved with theories of plague, disaster or war. But to the Watchers, perhaps they were simply experiments concluded, their thresholds crossed, their stories complete. If that is true, then what of us? Are we already writing our final chapter without realizing it? Every skyscraper, every machine, every war, Every act of neglect toward the earth might not be steps toward progress, but the final flourishes of a script being closed. The watchers may not need to intervene directly. Their silence may already mean that the decision has been made, that the curtain is descending slowly while we continue to perform. The thought terrifies me most when I think of our silence in space. We send signals into the void, broadcasts carrying our voices, our music, our desperate proof that we exist. But what if no one answers because the verdict has already been passed? What if the watchers have marked us as one of many civilizations that will not survive, and the silence is not indifference but dismissal? Perhaps our signals do not echo into emptiness. Perhaps they are received, recorded and filed away, part of a ledger already closed. Yet even in that dread, a strange curiosity gnaws at me. If the verdict has already been spoken, then why are we still here? Why do we wake each morning to a world that continues, a sun that rises, a sky that remains whole above us? Perhaps the watchers do not erase instantly. Perhaps erasure itself is a process, a gradual withdrawal of allowance until survival becomes impossible. A plague here, a climate shift there, a conflict that spirals out of control. To us, it looks like chance. To them, it is design, a slow unravelling meant to conclude the experiment without announcing itself. There is a deeper cruelty in this possibility, for it robs us even of awareness. To know that judgment is coming is at least to face it with dignity. But to live unknowingly inside a verdict, to believe we are free while every step we take has already been weighed and dismissed, that is a prison without walls. Perhaps that is why myths speak not only of destruction, but of deception. Gods who blind humanity before striking, leaving us unable to understand our own fate. I recall the moment I saw strange lights in an empty field, pulsing in patterns no natural phenomenon should make. They were not chaotic, but deliberate, yet they left without explanation, without message, leaving only silence behind. In that silence I now hear something different, not absence, but restraint. Perhaps the watchers revealed themselves only to remind me, and all of us, that their eyes remain on us, even if their verdict has already been written. The psychology of living under such suspicion is corrosive. It eats away at certainty, turning even the smallest acts into questions. When I see kindness, I wonder if it is enough. When I see cruelty, I wonder if it is the final mark against us. Every moment becomes both fragile and monumental, every choice echoing outward beyond us into records we will never read. And so, the thought returns, sharp as glass. If the threshold has already been crossed, then perhaps the real question is not whether we can change the verdict, but whether we will even recognise the moment when the curtain finally falls. That thought coils inside me, like a serpent, tightening whenever I look at history with new eyes. Perhaps the end never announces itself. Perhaps it comes not as a single thunderclap, but as a gradual dimming of the lights, a silence settling so slowly that by the time we notice, it is already complete. I think of Pompeii, where ash rained silently before fire consumed the air. Did the people there know they were living their final hours? Or did they believe the tremors beneath their feet were just another whisper from the restless earth? Their lives ended mid-sentence, mid-laughter, mid-breath. That is how endings come, not with a warning, but with a closing hand that leaves no time to prepare. If the watchers end us, perhaps it will be in this way, sudden, absolute, yet disguised as something natural. And yet, another possibility chills me deeper. What if the watchers do not erase civilizations through disasters alone, but through subtler means? The quiet manipulation of thought, the slow corruption of memory, the erosion of identity. A culture does not need fire to be destroyed. It can be dissolved from within, its stories forgotten, its unity fractured, until it becomes a shell of itself. And when the last story fades, it no longer matters whether the people still breathe. They are erased all the same. This thought makes me look at our own time differently. The chaos of misinformation, the way truth itself seems to crumble under conflicting voices, feels almost engineered. What better way to erase a civilization than to make it lose trust in itself? What better way to end a story than to strip its people of meaning, leaving them wandering in shadows of doubt until they collapse under their own confusion? If the Watchers use silence as their weapon, perhaps they also use noise. Too much noise, until we cannot hear ourselves think. I remember standing among the ruins of Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. The vast stone complexes aligned perfectly with the movements of the sun and stars. Whoever built them understood patterns, cycles, alignments beyond the scope of their age. Yet one day they simply vanished. No war, no fire, no clear reason. Just absence. Some say drought, some say migration. But what if it was something else? What if the Watchers withdrew the story, closed the chapter, and left behind only structures pointing to the sky? Monuments to an audience that never revealed itself. The silence grows heavier the more I walk among ruins. Stones do not lie. They tell us that greatness can vanish, that permanence is an illusion, that every monument we build may one day be no more than a puzzle for others to interpret. Perhaps the Watchers are less concerned with our triumphs than with our collapses. Perhaps collapse itself is the point. To watch how we unravel, how we cling to meaning in the face of silence, how we react when the curtain begins to fall without our knowing. The psychology of such a thought is unbearable at times. To believe that nothing we do can alter the verdict is to stare into despair. Yet another part of me wonders if that is the real test, to see whether we continue creating, loving, building, even when the end feels inevitable. Do we write music for an empty hall? Do we build cathedrals for gods who never answer? Do we strive for meaning even when we suspect no one is listening? Perhaps the Watchers are not waiting for perfection, but for persistence, to see if we continue even under the shadow of silence. And so the unease sharpens, cutting into me like glass. Maybe the curtain is already descending, and our only task is to play our part until the last light fades. But if that is true, then another question rises like a tide I cannot hold back. What if the Watchers do not end the story at all, but simply change its stage? The thought lingers in me like an afterimage burned into the sea, refusing to fade. If endings are not truly endings, but transitions, then what we call collapse might only be transformation. Civilizations that vanish may not have been destroyed. They may have been shifted into another form, their story continued on a stage we cannot yet see. When I walk through the ruins of the Mayan cities, I feel this possibility pressing against the silence. Towering pyramids stand like frozen voices, yet their people vanished into the forest, leaving behind calendars that track cycles larger than lifetimes. To us it looks like disappearance. But what if it was not disappearance at all, but relocation? Perhaps the stage changed, and the Watchers led them somewhere beyond our comprehension. The same unease strikes when I look at Easter Island. Those stone faces staring out toward the horizon feel less like monuments to ancestors and more like sentinels awaiting something. The society that built them fell into ruin, yes, but the statues remain, gazing outward as though keeping vigil for a ship, a signal, a summons. What if their purpose was never to look inward at the island, but outward to whoever watched from beyond? The possibility twists history into a different shape. Instead of a sequence of rises and falls, it becomes a sequence of migrations, from one stage to another, guided by forces invisible to us. Perhaps the Watchers do not erase civilizations. Perhaps they move them, shift them like pieces on a board from one world to the next or one dimension to another, carrying forward only what they choose. And what they leave behind, ruins, bones, fragments, are not the remains of destruction, but the discarded shells of what was no longer needed. It is a disturbing thought, because it suggests survival may not mean what we think. To continue might not mean to remain here, but to be taken elsewhere, reshaped for a purpose we do not understand. The myths of ascension, of people carried into the sky by gods, could be memories of such transitions, not dreams but records, distorted over generations into legends, but grounded in events as real as floods and wars. But if that is true, the question becomes darker. Who decides which civilizations are chosen to be shifted, and which are left behind to wither into silence? What qualities mark a people for continuation? Strength, knowledge, obedience, or something subtler, something hidden in the patterns of how we live and die? The Watcher's silence offers no answer, and yet I cannot ignore the way patterns emerge across time. Civilizations collapse when they reach their zenith, as though height itself is the trigger. It is almost theatrical, the stage changing at the moment the story grows most dramatic. The Watchers may not wait for decay. They may move the stage precisely at the height of the play, when the meaning is clearest, when the actors have revealed themselves fully. This changes how I see our own age. We stand on the edge of technologies that can rewrite life itself, extend consciousness, even shape the climate of our world. We believe we are approaching a golden age, but perhaps we're only nearing the end of this act. If the stage is about to shift, then everything we build may be nothing more than a prelude to being moved elsewhere. Our skyscrapers, our satellites, our digital archives, perhaps they are not for us at all, but records left deliberately behind, shells for the next to find. And in this possibility lies a question that is both terrifying and strangely hopeful. If the stage is changed, will we know it? Or will we, like those before us, simply vanish from one record and appear in another, unaware that we have crossed the threshold? The silence of the sky presses heavier as I dwell on it. If the Watchers change stages, then they are not only observers but directors, guiding the play without revealing the script. And if so, then the greatest mystery is not whether we are being watched, but whether the next act of our story has already begun without us realizing. The thought sends a shiver through me whenever I dwell on it. What if the transition is already underway, not in fire or collapse, but in quiet shifts so subtle that they slip beneath our awareness? We may think we live in continuity, but perhaps the world we walk through is already different than the one that came before. Sometimes I wonder if memory itself betrays us. Have you ever felt the uncanny sensation that something small has changed? A building different than you remember, a word spoken strangely, a detail in history that does not align with what you once knew? We dismiss it as error, as forgetfulness. But what if it is evidence of the stage changing, of adjustments made to the script while we remain unaware? Perhaps we're already crossing into the next act, and these slips are the seams where two realities meet. The myths of people vanishing in great numbers return to me with unsettling clarity. The Roanoke colony, where over 100 souls disappeared without trace, leaving only the word Croatoan carved into wood. To history, it is an unsolved riddle. To me it feels like a rehearsal, a glimpse of how transitions occur. No violence, no mass grave, no fire, only absence, as though the entire colony had been moved, taken from one stage to another, leaving behind an empty set. The same pattern echoes in more recent times. Airplanes lost over calm seas, ships vanishing into silence, entire crews never found. We call them accidents, mysteries of weather, magnetic anomalies. But what if they are extractions, sudden shifts carried out with surgical precision? If the Watchers truly change the stage, then these vanishings may not be failures of navigation but selections. Perhaps those who vanish are the first threads pulled from a fabric being unravelled, the early notes of a song that will soon consume us all. This thought erodes the ground of certainty. If disappearance is not death but relocation, then what becomes of those who are moved? Do they awaken in another place, another world, another layer of existence? Do they continue their lives, unaware that they are no longer where they began? Or do they become something else entirely, reshaped to fit the needs of a design we cannot comprehend? It terrifies me most when I think of dreams. Those strange moments when we wander landscapes that feel more real than waking life, when we meet people who seem familiar though we have never seen them. What if dreams are not illusions, but glimpses into the other stage? a place we visit briefly while asleep, where pieces of the transition leak through. Perhaps those who vanish entirely are simply pulled more completely into that stage, never to return. The watcher's silence becomes more sinister when viewed this way. It is not just the quiet of indifference, but the quiet of control. They do not need to announce themselves because their actions are woven into the fabric of our reality. The stage changes beneath us while we continue our parts, blind to the shifting floor. To resist is impossible when one cannot even see the hand that moves the world. And yet, another question gnaws at me in the darkness. If the stage has already begun to change, then why am I aware enough to suspect it? Why are there cracks in the curtain that allow glimpses through? Perhaps the watchers intend for some to notice, to sense the transition, to serve as witnesses or heralds of the next act. If so, then awareness is not an accident. It is part of the design, a signal that the transformation is already in progress. The weight of this realization bears down with suffocating intensity. If the play is moving forward, then our lives are already shifting toward a form we cannot yet imagine. And in that suffocating thought comes a question sharp as steel. What if the watchers are not merely shifting the stage, but preparing to step onto it themselves? The possibility clings to me with a weight heavier than silence. Observation alone is unsettling enough, but to imagine that those unseen eyes might one day move into the very world they have studied is to invite a dread deeper than annihilation. For what would it mean for them to enter? Would they come as architects to reshape what they have long measured, or as inheritors ready to claim what they have allowed us to borrow? I think of the strange accounts scattered through history, encounters described as visions, visitations, beings descending in fire or light. Our ancestors carved them into stone, painted them on cave walls, etched them into myths that survived millennia. Most dismiss them as dreams, hallucinations, or metaphor. But if the watchers have always lingered just beyond sight, perhaps these were not fantasies but rehearsals, brief moments where they stepped briefly through the curtain to test our reaction. A stage cannot change without its actors glimpsing the new scenery. Even in modern times, the stories persist. Travellers describing lights that moved with purpose. Pilots encountering objects defying all known physics. Ordinary people who claim to have lost hours under a sky that stared back. We label them anomalies, unproven, unscientific. But anomalies do not vanish. They accumulate, each one a whisper pointing towards something larger. What if these are not mistakes of perception, but signals that the watchers are drawing nearer, preparing to take their place upon the stage they themselves constructed? The thought reshapes the ruins I once wandered. Perhaps the monuments of old were not only offerings to gods, but invitations, stages built for those who watched from above. Stone circles aligned with solstices, pyramids angled toward stars, temples where light fell perfectly at specific moments of the year. All could have been attempts to mirror the watcher's presence, to prepare a place for them to step into. If so, then humanity has always sensed this possibility, always lived beneath the shadow of their eventual arrival. And if they come, what form will they take? Will they emerge as they are, or wear the shapes we are prepared to accept? Perhaps the figures of gods and spirits across cultures were not inventions at all, but rehearsals for appearances yet to come. Humanity may already have been conditioned to receive them, to kneel, to obey, to see in their arrival not invasion but fulfillment. Psychologically, the prospect fractures me. To be observed is to feel diminished, but to be confronted by the observers themselves is to face the shattering of meaning. Everything we have believed about progress, about independence, about destiny would collapse in an instant. Our history would no longer belong to us. It would be revealed as a chapter in someone else's design. And I cannot decide which is more terrifying, that they would arrive to judge us, or that they would arrive to claim us as their own. Yet I cannot escape another possibility, that they have already stepped onto the stage, and we simply do not see it. Their presence may not come with fire or thunder, but through subtler means. Influence woven into our stories, our instincts, even our biology. If they have watched us this long, They may know how to shape us from within rather than from without. A word whispered here, a dream seeded there, a thought that takes root across generations until we mistake their influence for our own evolution. And this thought, above all, pierces me. If they are preparing to enter, then perhaps they have always been here, only waiting for the moment when the curtain is lifted fully. Their eyes may not be distant stars at all, but already woven into the fabric of our world, waiting for us to realise we have never been alone. So the question burns sharper than before. When the Watchers finally step forward, will we recognise them as strangers? Or will we realise we have been living alongside them all along, blind to their presence until the moment they choose to reveal it? That question gnaws at me like a shadow on the edge of vision, a darkness that moves when I do but never shows its face. If their presence is already here, folded into the texture of our world, then what is it that we have been mistaking for ordinary all this time? I think of the ancient gods who demanded offerings, who spoke through storms and visions, who appeared and vanished at will. Across every culture the stories echo, beings descending from the sky, bearing knowledge, demanding obedience, altering the fate of nations. Could those figures have been Watchers already stepping forward, cloaked in the forms we could understand? Perhaps they were never myths at all, but appearances staged carefully, performances to prepare us for the day when the curtain would rise completely. The possibility shakes me most when I look at human progress. In sudden leaps, our species surges forward, stone to metal, fire to electricity, silence to radio, always too fast, too abrupt, as though guided. Was each leap truly our discovery, or the subtle hand of Watchers nudging us toward thresholds they themselves designed? If so, then their presence has not been passive but participatory, entwined with our very growth. To call them strangers would be false. They may already be part of us, our unseen teachers and silent judges. And yet, what unsettles me more is the thought that their presence may not be outside us at all. What if the Watchers are not above the sky, but within us? Buried in our DNA, etched into our instincts, coded into the very patterns of our thought. Perhaps they seeded themselves long ago, ensuring that when the time came to step forward, we would recognise them not as invaders, but as something deeply familiar, something that has always lived in our blood. The myths of humanity being shaped by divine hands begin to feel less like stories and more like confessions. Prometheus gifting fire, Quetzalcoatl teaching maize, gods moulding humans from clay. Are these not allegories for interventions, for the shaping of a species by beings who intended us to become what we are now? If so, then the Watchers are not preparing to enter at all. They have already entered through us, through every breath and thought we take. But then comes the darker possibility. If they live within us, what else have they shaped? Our wars, our hunger for conquest, our endless cycle of creation and destruction. Perhaps our flaws are not accidents, but carefully placed variables, meant to test whether we can overcome them or be consumed by them. The Watchers may not be separate from our cruelty. They may be the source of it, sculpting us not only toward greatness, but toward self-destruction, watching to see which path we choose. This realization changes how I see every act of violence, every moment of kindness. Perhaps these are not simply human choices, but signals, answers to a question posed long before we were born. We are not only actors in a play, we are experiments in morality, our decisions the data they seek. And if so, then their stepping forward will not be to surprise us. It will be to deliver the conclusion of a test we never knew we were taking. The silence of the cosmos weighs heavier than ever when I dwell on this, for silence itself might be the answer. If they have been here all along, if they are within us, then they do not need to announce themselves. They only need to wait until we reveal what we are, and perhaps that revelation is already underway. So I ask myself with growing dread, if the Watchers are already among us, hidden in the faces we pass on the street, the voices we hear in dreams, the thoughts that rise unbidden in our minds, then what will it mean when they finally decide to show us their true reflection? The question lingers like a shadow on glass, pressing against me in ways I cannot escape. If they reveal themselves, will it be as saviours, destroyers, or something far more incomprehensible? And if their reflection is woven into us already, then perhaps what we see will not be foreign at all, but terrifyingly familiar. I remember standing before an ancient mirror in a museum, its surface dulled by centuries, yet still able to catch the faint trace of my face. The image staring back at me felt strange, distorted, almost as though another gaze was layered upon mine. In that moment I wondered if humanity itself is their mirror. What if, when they finally show us their true reflection, it is through us, our own cruelty, our own tenderness, our own endless hunger for more? Perhaps they are not waiting to descend from the skies, but to awaken inside the very image we already carry. The psychology of this unsettles me deeply. To look at a stranger and wonder if I am seeing only flesh, or if something older peers back through their eyes, is to lose the boundary of self. The line between watcher and watched blurs until I can no longer tell if I am the subject of observation, or the vessel through which observation flows. Perhaps the watchers have already revealed themselves, not as separate beings, but as parts of us we have not yet recognised. History becomes sharper under this lens. Consider prophets who claimed voices spoke through them, poets who felt words pour into their minds from nowhere, inventors who saw visions of machines before they could be built. Were these flashes of brilliance purely human, or were they glimpses of another intelligence surfacing through the cracks? The watchers may have always spoken through chosen voices, letting fragments of themselves ripple into our world while never showing their full reflection. And what of madness? The visions, the voices that drive some to the edge. Could those be the moments when the veil thins too far, when the reflection breaks through too suddenly for the mind to bear? Perhaps what we call illness is sometimes only proximity to truths we are not meant to see yet. If so, then the boundary between genius and insanity is not a human fault, but the mark of an intelligence brushing against our own. The myths of doubles, of doppelgangers, haunt me in this light. Tales of people encountering exact copies of themselves, said to be omens of death or transformation. What if those were not superstitions, but encounters with reflections projected by the watchers, brief moments when they allowed us to glimpse the other version of ourselves, the one shaped, guided, perhaps even perfected according to their design? If so, then their true reflection is not alien at all, but a perfected echo of humanity itself. And yet the cruelty of this possibility lies in its silence. If their reflection is bound to ours, then we may never know where they end and we begin. Every war might be our choice, or it might be the watcher's test. Every kindness might be our compassion, or it might be their hand guiding us toward a standard we do not comprehend. In this mirror, we're not only reflections, but experiments, polished until the day they finally choose to reveal what image we have formed. The silence of the stars grows unbearable when I think of it this way. Not silence at all, but waiting. Waiting for us to see what has always been there. Waiting for us to recognise ourselves in the reflection they finally present. And when that day comes, the revelation will not be about them, but about us. So I return to the same chilling question, heavier each time it rises. If their reflection is already within us, then when the watchers decide to reveal it, will we recognise the face in the mirror, or recoil from it in horror, knowing it was ours all along? That question lingers like a bruise on the mind, tender to the touch, impossible to ignore. If what they show us is truly ourselves, then the horror lies not in encountering the alien, but in confronting the truth of what we have become under their gaze. I think of the countless masks humanity has worn, the conquerors who built empires on bones, the saints who gave their lives for mercy, the tyrants who demanded obedience, the visionaries who saw futures no one else could imagine. Each one, perhaps, is a fragment of the reflection they are shaping, not one face, but many. drawn from our extremes. What if their design is not to make us like them, but to reveal what we're capable of when tested from every angle? The weight of this thought bears down hardest when I walk through places where cruelty has left scars. Concentration camps, battlefields, forgotten prisons. Here the reflection feels clearest. The watchers must have seen every act of violence, every choice to harm when kindness was possible, every decision to enslave, to erase, to annihilate. These places are mirrors darker than obsidian, showing what humanity chooses when faced with fear and power. If their reflection is built from these moments, what will the final image look like? And yet, I cannot deny the light that persists even in shadow. In the ruins of war, I have seen strangers risk everything to protect each other. In the ashes of catastrophe, people rebuild with hands blistered but unyielding. Love persists even where hate would be easier. Kindness flickers even in the blackest nights. The watchers must see this too. If they are shaping a reflection, then it is not only cruelty they collect, but compassion. Perhaps the final face is not one or the other, but both, locked in eternal tension. Still, another possibility chills me deeper. What if the watchers are not guiding us toward balance, but toward revelation of choice? Perhaps the reflection they reveal will not be a portrait they designed, but the sum of what we have chosen freely. Every cruelty, every kindness, every silence in the face of suffering, all woven into a single mirror, one that does not lie. And when they lift that mirror before us, we may recoil not because it is alien, but because it is exact. Psychologically, this is the sharpest wound of all. To live knowing that every act, no matter how small, may be part of the record they prepare. It makes even the quiet moments unbearable. A smile, a betrayal, a whispered kindness, a casual cruelty, all may echo louder than we realise. The watcher's silence may not mean indifference, but scrutiny so complete that nothing is forgotten. I return often to myths of judgment, scales weighing souls, books recording deeds, gods who tally every action. Perhaps these myths were not inventions of fearful minds, but memories of the watcher's method, not gods, but archivists, holding the mirror until the final moment when the reflection is undeniable. Our religions may have been early glimpses of this truth, wrapped in symbols so we could endure it, but what terrifies me most is the possibility that the reflection has already been revealed, not to all, but to some. Prophets who saw visions, saints who spoke of unbearable light, mystics who claim to see the world as it truly is. What if they glimpsed the mirror and could not endure it? Perhaps their lives were shaped by the knowledge that the watchers had already shown them the truth, and the rest of us remain blind only because the moment has not yet come. And so the question sharpens until it cuts like a blade. When the watchers finally lift the mirror to all of us, will we find the strength to face it? Or will we shatter under the weight of a reflection we never truly wanted to see? That question lingers in my bones like a sickness, making me wonder whether our fear is not of them, but of ourselves. What could be so unbearable in our reflection that we would rather cling to silence than face it? I remember walking through an abandoned cathedral, its windows shattered, its floor dusted with centuries of neglect. The altar still stood, though the offerings had long since turned to ash. And as the light poured through the broken glass, I thought, this is what it will feel like to stand before a mirror that does not lie, in a place where faith, pride, and excuses no longer matter. Only the truth of who we are remains, and truth is merciless. Humanity has always feared judgment, perhaps because some part of us remembers. The scales of Egypt, the final fires of Norse myth, the endless cycle of karma. Each culture builds its own mirror, its own way of preparing for the reckoning that silence conceals. Perhaps those myths are not imagination, but fragments of warning, echoes of times when others glimpsed the watcher's reflection and struggled to put it into words. But if the mirror is raised, what will it show? Not only our violence, but our indifference. Not only the wars that scarred continents, but the quiet neglect that allowed suffering to spread unchecked. The moments when we could have acted, but chose not to. Perhaps these weigh heavier than all the catastrophes, for they reveal not what we could not control, but what we would not. The thought corrodes me when I look at modern cities. Towers scrape the skies while beneath them. The hungry sleep on concrete. Machines carry voices across oceans, yet millions remain unheard. We conquer distances, bend nature to our will, but falter in compassion. If this is the reflection being built, then perhaps we already know the truth, and that is why we fear the Watcher's silence. Because silence leaves us no excuse, no distraction, only the certainty of being seen exactly as we are. And yet within that despair, I find a strange resilience. For if the Watchers truly seek to reveal our reflection, then it is not finished yet. Every act, every choice adds to the image. The mirror is still being polished, and until it is lifted, we have a chance to change what it shows. That thought steadies me in the face of dread, that perhaps their waiting is not cruelty but opportunity. The silence is not only judgment withheld, but time given. Time to face ourselves before they make us face the truth. But another fear claws deeper. What if the mirror is not for us at all? What if its purpose is not to reveal our reflection to humanity, but to them? Perhaps we're not meant to look into it. Perhaps the Watchers are building an image for their own records, their own purposes, one we will never see. If so, then everything we do is less about self-discovery and more about feeding into a design we will never understand. That possibility empties the world of meaning, turning every act into data, every life into a line in their archive. Still, a darker suspicion rises when I walk through the ruins of fallen empires. What if some civilizations have already seen the mirror? What if their silence, their disappearance, is because they faced their reflection and could not endure it? Perhaps their collapse was not destruction, but surrender, the shattering of societies that realized they were not what they thought themselves to be. If so, then the ruins scattered across our earth are not only remnants of history, but warnings of what it means to meet the Watcher's gaze. The silence presses in heavier now, for if the mirror is lifted in our time, then the question is no longer abstract. It becomes immediate, merciless, final. And I cannot shake the fear that when the Watchers reveal what they see in us, it will not be salvation or enlightenment, but a truth so sharp that it severs everything we have ever believed about ourselves. That possibility sits like a stone in the chest, heavy and immovable, pressing against every breath. For if truth is sharper than salvation, then perhaps it was never meant to comfort us. Perhaps the Watchers have always known that truth destroys before it transforms. I think of the ancient rituals where initiates were stripped of their names, their identities, their pasts, left naked before a symbol of the divine. To return from such rites was to be remade, but not without pain. The tearing away of illusions is not gentle, it wounds, it scars. What if the Watchers prepare something similar on a scale too vast for us to imagine? A collective initiation, where the truth they reveal slices away everything we thought we were until nothing remains but what is undeniable. The ruins of Thebes whisper this thought to me still. In their stones I feel not only the collapse of a city, but the collapse of certainty. Imagine a people who believed they were favoured by gods, only to discover that the gods were not gods at all, but Watchers indifferent to their worship. What happens when a civilization realizes its meaning was built on a misunderstanding? Does it crumble because of famine, war, or because its spirit has been cut away by revelation? The more I dwell on this, the more I fear that humanity itself is brittle, held together not by strength, but by stories. Nations are bound by myths, identities by narratives, leaves by the fragile threads of belief. If the Watchers tear those threads, if they reveal truths that render our stories hollow, then collapse will not come through fire or plague. It will come through despair. What could survive when the very foundations of meaning are gone? And yet part of me wonders if this is precisely the point. To strip away illusions is cruel, but perhaps necessary. If the Watchers reveal to us that we are not alone, that we have never been alone, then every religion, every philosophy, every assumption of uniqueness falls apart. But maybe from that ruin, something stronger can emerge. A new story, one built not on blindness, but on clarity. The question is whether we can endure the breaking long enough to rebuild. Still, another possibility gnaws at me, darker than all the rest. What if the truth they reveal is not that we are small or fragile or misguided, but that we were never what we thought at all? What if humanity itself is not a species but a construct? What if we were shaped, designed, cultivated for reasons that have nothing to do with us? The mirror they raise might not show us as flawed beings struggling toward progress, but as an experiment, a tool, a creation belonging to someone else. To see that reflection would not only destroy pride, it would destroy identity itself. Psychologically, this is the edge of the abyss. For what do we become if we realise we're not our own? Every act of kindness, every discovery, every triumph, suddenly reframed as nothing more than outcomes in someone else's test. Even rebellion becomes meaningless when the test itself includes it. To confront this would be to face not just mortality, but the loss of self. And that may be why silence endures. Perhaps they know the truth cannot be spoken until we are ready to lose everything we think we are. The silence of the stars feels less passive the more I dwell on it. It is not absence, but preparation. Like a pause before a blade strikes, or before a curtain is torn away. The Watchers are not only recording, they are waiting for the moment when the truth will cut us open. And when it does, there will be no turning back, no return to comfort, no reweaving of the stories we once clung to. So the thought echoes through me with a final, terrible weight. When the Watchers decide to show us the truth, will it end us, or remake us into something we no longer recognise? That question is a storm inside me, unrelenting, pulling every thought into its orbit. If revelation comes, it will not be gentle. It will strike like lightning, splitting the world in two, the time before and the time after. And in that flash, everything we thought unshakable will either crumble or transform. I once stood in a field on a night when the sky tore itself open with light. It was not thunder, not storm, but something stranger, a pulse that seemed to ripple through the stars themselves, silent yet overwhelming. For a moment I felt as though the curtain had lifted and the Watchers were no longer distant, but present, hovering just at the edge of sight. My heart pounded not with fear, but with recognition, as though something in me already knew what was there. Then it was gone. The stars were silent again. Yet I have never forgotten that moment, for it felt less like chance and more like a warning. If the truth comes in this way, sudden, undeniable, impossible to look away from, how will we endure it? Nations would fracture under the weight of revelation. Religions would tremble. Science, so proud of its certainty, would be forced to kneel before a reality greater than its instruments could measure. Humanity itself would split, some clinging to denial, others surrendering to war, others collapsing into despair. A single revelation could shatter us more completely than any weapon. And yet another possibility lingers, even more terrifying. What if the revelation does not come in light or sound, but inside us? A shift in consciousness, a sudden awakening to truths long buried. Imagine walking through your life as always, only to realise one day that everything around you is layered with another meaning you had never seen. Streets, faces, words, all transformed by a new awareness. This would be the deepest fracture of all, for it would not only change the world outside, but the world within. The Watchers may not even need to show themselves. To remake us, they need only reveal what has been hidden inside us all along. Perhaps the truth is already imprinted in our minds, locked away until they decide to release it. When that lock turns, who will we become? Will we still recognise our loves, our fears, our histories, or will they seem like illusions, masks we wore until the moment the mirror was raised? I think of those who have claimed visions, moments of unbearable clarity when the world opened before them. Prophets, mystics, wanderers who spoke of truths no one else could bear to hear. Perhaps they were the early fractures, those in whom the lock turned too soon. Their lives often ended in exile, in ridicule, in despair. If the revelation comes to all of us, then humanity may share their fate on a grand scale. A world filled with prophets suddenly awakened to a truth so sharp it cuts away the ground beneath their feet. The thought gnaws at me until sleep itself becomes a battlefield. What if dreams are practice? Strange landscapes, unfamiliar laws of time and space, voices speaking in symbols we cannot decode. All could be rehearsals, conditioning us for the moment the truth floods in. If so, then the Watchers are not waiting to show us something new. They are waiting for us to realise we have already seen it countless times in fragments that we dismiss as illusions. And so the fear sharpens into a blade that cuts two ways. The truth, when it comes, will not only end the world we know, but may also birth a new one we cannot yet imagine. Whether that birth is survival or annihilation depends not on them, but on us. Can we endure the breaking? Can we step into a reflection so alien, so merciless, that it remakes us entirely? The silence of the stars seems louder than thunder as I wrestle with this. It feels less like absence and more like anticipation, as though the Watchers hold their breath, waiting for the moment to strike. And when they do, there will be no hiding, no delay, no escape, only revelation, sharp and final, tearing through the world like fire. So the question presses in until I can scarcely breathe. When that moment comes, will we rise into something greater, or fall into a silence from which there is no return? The question haunts me like a shadow stretching longer with each passing day. It clings to the edges of thought, to the silences between heartbeats, reminding me that all we have built stands on ground that could vanish beneath us in an instant. I walk sometimes at night through streets emptied of sound, when lamps glow faintly and windows stare like blind eyes. In those hours the world feels brittle, as though it could fracture with the smallest touch. If the Watchers choose that moment to reveal themselves, what would I see? Would the street bend away like paper peeled back? Would the sky tear open to show machinery where stars once burned? Or would nothing change at all except the certainty that I was no longer free? The silence of their gaze is worse than thunder. Silence stretches into the marrow, feeding doubt, feeding dread. Perhaps that is why we fill our lives with noise, engines, voices, endless signals. Not to connect, but to cover the weight of being watched. If we stopped, if the world went still, perhaps we would hear it more clearly, the presence behind the silence. I think of ancient temples aligned perfectly with the heavens, monuments built not only to worship but to signal. They pointed to stars with an accuracy impossible without guidance. Why build with such precision unless someone was expected to look back? Perhaps those temples were not messages to gods at all, but mirrors raised toward the Watchers, desperate attempts to say, "We know you are there." And yet no answer came, at least not one we recognised. The ruins remain, mute and immense, as though waiting for a response still withheld. Were those civilizations silenced because they reached too far? Or were they abandoned because they had said enough, their act concluded, their signal received? The Watcher's patience is unbearable to imagine. For us a century feels vast, 1,000 years unthinkable. But to them, time may be nothing more than the slow turn of a page. They can wait as our empires rise and fall, as our oceans advance and retreat, as our very species reshapes itself. Waiting may not be a burden to them at all, but their language, a silence so long that it forces meaning into the smallest of our choices. And so I fear the thresholds we cross without even knowing. Each machine we build to mimic thought, Each weapon we create to mirror the sun, each step we take beyond the cradle of our world, all may be signals, not to us, but to them. Perhaps the Watchers do not measure us by intention, but by consequence. Perhaps every invention is another line in their record, another reason to hold their silence just a little longer. Yet what if silence itself is the test? If they reveal themselves too soon, perhaps we would collapse, our fragile myths shattering under the weight of knowledge. By withholding, they measure whether we can bear their absence, whether we can create meaning in the void. If so, then endurance itself may be the trial. To live, to build, to love under a gaze that never speaks. This may be the only way we prove we are ready. But the deeper fear returns, unrelenting. What if we are not being prepared for greatness at all, but for erasure? What if silence is not a gift of time, but the pause before the strike? A predator does not roar before it hunts. It waits, patient, invisible, until the moment is right. If the Watchers are predators, then our history is not growth, but fattening. Our progress, our pride, nothing more than the ripening of prey. And so I walk through the night and listen to the silence that hangs heavier than stone. It presses against me like a weight I cannot lift, and I realise the truth I fear most is not destruction, but continuation. That the silence will stretch on forever, unbroken, until the Watchers decide we have nothing left to give. The thought that coils through me like smoke is this. What if the silence itself is the verdict, and we are already serving a sentence we cannot see? The thought curls around me like a chain I did not know was fastened until I tried to move. If silence is not waiting, but judgment, then every day we live is not freedom, but a slow execution. The Watchers would not need fire or flood to end us. They would only need to let us continue, decaying under the weight of our own ignorance, unravelling until nothing remains. I've walked through cities where the silence is louder than voices, empty factories, hollow streets, neighbourhoods abandoned to weeds and rust. Once these places were alive with ambition. Now they're shells. We call it economic collapse, migration, change. But sometimes I wonder if these fragments are symptoms of the greater sentence. Perhaps the Watchers allow us to build, only to watch how quickly our creations rot. A civilization can collapse without fire. All it needs is silence and the erosion of will. The ruins of Angkor still haunt me. Temples swallowed by roots, stone faces gazing out with smiles that no longer meet human eyes. Nature crept back, unhurried, erasing the works of kings who believed themselves eternal. We say drought ended them, or war. But what if the Watchers simply turned away? If silence is the verdict, then withdrawal of attention is the execution. A story ends not with thunder, but with neglect. What troubles me most is how familiar this feels. We live in an age of noise, endless signals, lights and screens. But beneath it all, silence grows. The silence of alienation, of meaning slipping away, of truths drowned in contradictions. Perhaps this too is part of the sentence. The Watchers do not need to strike us. They only need to leave us doubting ourselves until we collapse in confusion. Psychologically, this is the most unbearable prison. To be punished without knowing the crime. To live each day as though free, while unseen laws dictate that the ending has already been written. We search for answers in myths, in science, in faith, yet each answer fractures into more questions. If silence is the verdict, then perhaps the greatest cruelty is that we will never know for certain. Certainty itself has been denied. And yet, I cannot dismiss the other possibility, that silence is not punishment but observation continued, that the sentence is not destruction but endurance. To live under silence forever, with no resolution, no final revelation, is its own kind of torment. A story that never ends, only circles. Perhaps the Watchers are not executioners, but jailers. We are not awaiting destruction. We are living inside captivity, bound not by walls but by unanswered questions. I remember once staring into the night sky until my vision blurred, stars trembling into streaks of light. In that dizziness, I felt as though I could almost see the bars of the cage. The constellations themselves seemed like patterns etched not for beauty but for confinement. If silence is the verdict, then the stars are not windows but locks, glittering reminders that the sentence has no end. Still, part of me clings to defiance. If silence is meant to break us, then perhaps the true act of rebellion is to keep living with meaning anyway. To build, to love, to remember, even when the watchers refuse to answer. Perhaps our sentence can become our freedom, if we choose to see silence not as confinement, but as space in which to create. This thought steadies me for a moment. But then the darker possibility returns, relentless. What if silence is not space to create, but space to erase? What if every generation, every story is only another layer of dust covering what we once were, until nothing is left but absence? The watchers would not need to strike. They would only need to wait. And one day, Earth itself will be a ruin, its silence final, its story unread. So the question coils back into me, heavier than before. If silence is the verdict, then is there any way to appeal it? Or are we condemned to vanish quietly, without ever knowing why? That question coils inside me like a whisper from a locked room. If there is no chance of appeal, then we live only to fade. But if there is a way to resist, then perhaps everything depends on whether we can speak loudly enough to be heard beyond the silence. I think of the first messages humanity sent into the void. Radio waves spilling into space. Coded music, greetings in dozens of languages. We sent them not knowing if anyone would hear, desperate to break the silence with proof of our existence. Perhaps those signals were not innocent gestures at all, but the only kind of appeal we could make. A plea to unseen judges to acknowledge that we are here, alive, and worth remembering. Yet decades have passed, and no answer has come. Was our appeal denied, or merely ignored? The ruins of civilizations tell a similar story. Carvings left on stone, symbols written into earthworks, monuments aligned with the heavens, all attempts to be seen, to be heard, to reach beyond time and space. These were their appeals, their declarations. We existed. But the silence that followed swallowed them all. If they too were appealing to the watchers, then perhaps their lack of response was the answer. The verdict stood. Still, a troubling thought grows deeper. What if appeals are not ignored but collected? What if every signal, every prayer, every desperate message cast into the sky is recorded, weighed, and compared? Perhaps the silence is not absence, but the space where judgment gathers, where every appeal is filed away until the ledger is complete. If so, then our voices do not vanish. They are preserved, waiting for a final decision we may never hear. Psychologically, this makes the silence unbearable. To know that every act, every word may be evidence in a trial without end, a trial whose verdict we will never witness, is to live inside a prison without walls. Our lives are no longer our own. They become arguments, unspoken testimonies, fragments of a case we cannot even understand. And the cruelest part is that the jury never speaks. I walked once through a desert where the wind sculpted dunes like waves frozen in place. Beneath that silence, I felt as though the earth itself were listening. Perhaps that is our truest appeal. Not the monuments or messages, but the way we live, the stories we carry, the marks we leave on the land itself. If the watchers are listening, maybe they do not wait for our voices, but for the shape of our lives. Perhaps the only appeal is existence itself carved into the fabric of time. Yet another thought presses darker. What if there is no appeal because there is no court, no judge, no mercy? Silence itself may be the only truth. The watchers may not grant appeals because they never intended to. They may not even see us as capable of deserving one. In that possibility lies the greatest despair, that we have mistaken indifference for trial, that the silence is not waiting, but abandonment. And still, part of me resists. If we are abandoned, then perhaps the meaning lies not in their judgment, but in our defiance of it. To create, to love, to remember, even when unseen, is to refuse silence. Perhaps that is the only way to appeal, not to them, but to ourselves. To prove that we are more than the verdict imposed upon us. But the question does not let go. It lingers in the stillness of night, in the echoes of ruins, in the faint hum of signals vanishing into endless dark. If the silence is the verdict, then was it ever possible to appeal? Or is the absence itself the final and eternal answer? The words gnaw at me as though they were carved into the marrow of my bones. If absence is the only reply, then perhaps all our signals, our monuments, our prayers were never meant to reach anyone. They may have been echoes meant for ourselves, desperate affirmations against the endless dark. But what if silence is not absence? What if it is presence disguised? I think back to the strange objects that pass through our solar system, the ones we called wanderers from interstellar space. They moved with an elegance that mocked randomness, as though each adjustment was measured, intentional. Scientists tried to explain them as ice, as rock, as debris from faraway stars. Yet the more they insisted, the more hollow their certainty sounded. What if those objects were not visitors, but instruments? Silent machines lingering at the edge of perception, not speaking because speaking was never their purpose. Watching was enough. This thought reframes everything. Perhaps silence is not the verdict but the method. Words are unnecessary when observation itself is the trial. Every collapse, every act of cruelty, every fleeting kindness is already testimony. The absence of reply is not dismissal but acknowledgement. They do not need to answer because they are already recording. And so I return to history, and the unease grows. Civilizations did not vanish randomly. They vanished at turning points. The Indus Valley, advanced and ordered, dissolved into dust without war. The Maya, whose temples soared to the heavens, abandoned their cities almost overnight. Each collapse feels less like chaos and more like conclusion. Perhaps these were not endings by accident, but endings chosen. The watchers may not have waited for appeals. They may have closed the book when the story reached a point they alone understood. Psychologically, this unsettles me more than destruction itself, for it suggests that our fate is not ours to choose. We do not decide when the curtain falls, we only act until someone else dims the light. That truth corrodes hope, turning even triumph into futility. Why build, why love, why endure, if the end can arrive not by failure but by decision? And yet another suspicion cuts deeper. What if those who vanished did not end at all? What if silence was not conclusion but transition? Civilizations may not have been erased, but removed. Moved to another place, another layer, another reality. The silence they left behind on Earth may have been deliberate, the watchers erasing only the evidence while the story continued elsewhere. In that case, the absence is not eternal, but selective. What we see as disappearance may be only transformation, hidden from us because we're not meant to follow. This thought burns when I stand among ruins. Stone steps worn smooth by feet long gone. Walls where carvings whisper names. No one remembers. To us these are graves. But what if they are husks, shells abandoned when the living were lifted away? What if silence is the mask that hides continuation? If that is true, then the Watcher's methods are even more unfathomable. For it means we cannot tell whether we are doomed to vanish or destined to move beyond. Silence conceals both outcomes, and perhaps that is the point. To keep us uncertain, to force us into acts that reveal who we are when answers never come. Do we despair? Do we persist? Do we keep building, even when we fear no one will ever see? The trial may not be about what we achieve, but how we endure under silence itself. Still, the question will not release me. Are we next? Are we already nearing the moment when the Watchers will decide whether to close our chapter or to move us into another story entirely? The silence grows heavier each night. and I cannot tell whether it is mercy or sentence, judgment or preparation. And so the thought sharpens into a single blade of fear. If silence is not absence, then it is intention, and the decision about us may already have been made. The thought pierces me with a cold clarity, as if the verdict has already been whispered in chambers beyond our reach, and we are only waiting for its execution to arrive. What if every day we live is simply the waiting room of a sentence already sealed? I find myself drawn back to the idea of patterns. Collapse never comes without symmetry. Civilizations rise, reach their zenith, and then dissolve, not randomly, but rhythmically, like a chord played again and again on the strings of history. Perhaps this is no accident. Perhaps the watchers repeat this rhythm deliberately, refining their design, ending each cycle at the precise moment they choose. If their silence is intention, then it means our future is already contained within the pattern of those who came before. The Mayans, the Sumerians, the Olmecs, the lost cultures of the Amazon, each vanished as if the page was turned too quickly. We study their ruins, but ruins are only the residue of decisions we cannot comprehend. If the watchers ended them, then their silence was not absence. It was choice. A choice to stop one story and begin another, without explanation, without warning. The possibility unsettles me most when I think of our own age. We imagine ourselves different, superior to the ones who fell before. Yet we repeat their mistakes. Endless wars, neglect of the earth, arrogance in our towers of steel and glass. What if the watchers have already seen enough? What if they recognize the signs before we do? Their silence could be the stillness of finality, the kind of pause that comes not from indecision, but from certainty. Psychologically, this leaves me suspended between dread and defiance. If the decision has been made, then all our striving may be meaningless, every act reduced to a final footnote in a story already ended. But another part of me resists, for, even if the watchers have judged us, we continue. We love, we build, we remember. Perhaps meaning does not come from their verdict, but from the refusal to collapse before it arrives. And yet the darker suspicion lingers. What if their silence is not finality, but preparation? If they intend to act, then perhaps the silence is the last moment before the curtain rises on something we cannot escape. Their observation may not have been about judgment at all, but about readiness. They may not have been weighing us, but waiting for the precise moment to step forward. The myths of return haunt me here. Gods who promise to come back, beings who leave with the vow that one day they will descend again. Perhaps these are not dreams but warnings. The watchers may already have acted once, and their silence now may mean only that the cycle is about to repeat. When they return, it may not be to judge, but to reclaim. I walked once along a shore at dusk when the sea reflected the last light of the sky. The horizon blurred into infinity, and for a moment I felt as though I stood at the edge of two worlds, the one I knew and the one beyond, silent but waiting. It struck me then that silence may not be the end at all. It may be the threshold. The watcher's decision may not be to erase us, but to move us across that horizon into a realm where their silence finally breaks. But that realization terrifies me more than annihilation. For if silence is intention, then we are not free. We are not drifting aimlessly in a vast cosmos. We are contained, measured, prepared. And when the moment comes, it will not matter what we believe, for belief itself will dissolve into what has already been chosen. So the question sharpens until it becomes unbearable. If their silence is not absence but intention, then what is it they intend to do with us? And why have they waited until now to act? That question tears through me like a blade splitting the fabric of certainty. If intention lies behind the silence, then we are not abandoned. We are contained, like actors waiting backstage, unaware that the curtain will soon rise. The waiting is not ours, it is theirs. I think of how predators move. The stillness before the strike is not hesitation, it is timing. Every second is chosen, Every pause is deliberate. Perhaps the watchers are not unsure of what to do with us, but exact in when to do it. Their patience may stretch beyond our comprehension, but patience is not mercy. It is strategy. The evidence of timing is everywhere. Why did civilizations rise only to vanish so suddenly? Why did knowledge surge in bursts, only to wither back into silence? The watchers may not guide us continuously, but intervene at precise intervals, pushing us forward, then stepping back until we reach the next threshold. Their silence is not endless. It is punctuated, patterned, a rhythm too vast for us to hear. What unsettles me most is the possibility that now is one of those intervals, that the watchers are no longer distant but preparing to move. The signs gather in strange lights, in unexplained phenomena, in whispers of things seen and then denied. Perhaps they have always lingered at the edges of our perception, but now they lean closer. And the question is not whether they will act, but what form that action will take. Psychologically, this thought corrodes every sense of security. To live believing the world is stable, only to realise it may be the stage for something else entirely, is to stand on shifting ground. Perhaps the watchers intend to reveal themselves. Perhaps they intend to remove us. Perhaps their silence has lasted until now, because the time for decision has finally arrived. And if that is true, then everything we know is already ending. But another possibility grows darker still. What if they do not intend to destroy us, but to transform us? What if all of human history has been a preparation, each age another step toward a form we cannot yet imagine? Their silence may not hide judgment, but cultivation. We may not be prey, but seeds, and what they intend to do with us is harvest. The myths of transformation echo too clearly. Gods remaking humans from clay. Beings who descend to alter flesh, to gift fire, to take daughters of men as their own. We have always told stories of being changed by those from above. Perhaps those stories are not memory but prophecy, fragments of truth carried forward in disguise. If they intend to act now, then perhaps the moment of transformation has arrived. I think often of how we play with life ourselves. We splice genes, grow organs in laboratories, alter the very code of what it means to exist. We act as if we are creators, shaping life for our own purposes. What if the watchers see us exactly as we see the creatures we mould? Their silence could be the calm of scientists watching their experiment near completion. And when they finally act, it will not be to ask permission, but to claim the result. And yet, another dread lingers. What if their intention is not to transform us, but to replace us? What if we were never meant to last forever, but only to prepare the ground for something else? The watcher's silence could mean they are waiting for the exact moment when our role is finished, when we have given all we can. And when that moment comes, they will not need to erase us with fire. They will simply step into the world we built and leave us behind. The silence grows unbearable when I imagine it this way. Not empty, not indifferent, but full of intention, a weight pressing against every breath. The watchers know what they mean to do. We are the only ones left in the dark. So the question twists sharper than ever. If they have already decided, then what is it they see in us that has made them wait until now? And what will we become when their silence finally breaks? The question coils through me like smoke, impossible to grasp, yet choking all the same. If they have been watching since the beginning, why choose this moment? What is it about our age that has drawn their gaze closer, their silence heavier, as though the pause before speech is stretching to its final breath? I look at the arc of history and see a line bending sharply upward. For thousands of years we moved slowly, our lives tethered to seasons, to hunger, to the rhythm of earth and sky. And then suddenly, in a flicker of centuries, we leapt. We split atoms, sent machines beyond our world, turned the invisible into information that pulses endlessly across the air. Our knowledge surges like fire catching dry wood. Perhaps this is what they waited for. Not for us to exist, but for us to accelerate. To reach a threshold where what we create escapes our control. The Watchers may not fear our violence, but our potential. For a species that can alter its own nature is no longer just an experiment. It becomes something else entirely. Perhaps they waited for this precise moment, when we stand on the edge of rewriting ourselves, to decide whether we are allowed to continue, or whether the stage must be cleared for another attempt. Psychologically, this realization unsettles everything, for it means that all our progress may not be triumph, but the trigger. Every machine we build, every code we write into life itself, may be what summons their hand. We believed advancement would protect us, but what if it is what condemns us? And yet, another possibility flickers. What if they have waited because this is the first time we might be ready to meet them? Silence may not hide condemnation, but preparation. The Watchers could have acted long ago when we were still carving gods into stone, still fumbling in the dark. But what would have been the point? We would not have understood. Perhaps now, for the first time, we have reached a level where recognition is possible. Their silence may not be ending us. It may be preparing us for conversation. But if that is true, then why the dread that tightens around me whenever I consider it? Because conversation may not mean equality. To speak with us may not be to welcome us. It may be to instruct us, to command us, to tell us finally what we are and what we were made for. And that knowledge could shatter us more completely than destruction ever could. The myths whisper warnings. Prometheus punished for bringing fire. Towers toppled when they reached too high. Serpents in gardens offering knowledge that ends innocence. Every story seems to circle the same truth. Knowledge is the threshold, and beyond it lies judgment. Perhaps our age is simply the latest retelling of that eternal lesson. I think of nights when the world feels on the verge of breaking. Storms tearing the sky open, machines failing without cause, strange lights lingering where they should not be. In those moments, silence feels different. Not passive, but watching closely, as though waiting for a single choice to tip the balance. Perhaps the Watchers do not need to act yet. Perhaps they are waiting for us to decide what kind of reflection they will finally see. And still, the darker fear refuses to fade. What if their silence is not broken with words at all, but with action? A sudden vanishing, a quiet removal, a turning of the page so swift we scarcely realize it has happened. If they have waited until now, perhaps it is because the final act is already set. The silence may not be a question. It may be the drum beat before the curtain falls. So the thought presses harder than breath. If their silence is about to end, then will it come as revelation, or as disappearance? And will we even know the difference when it happens? The thought hangs over me like a storm that will not break, a pressure building in the air, visible but undeniable. Revelation and disappearance may be two sides of the same event. To us, the unveiling of truth might feel indistinguishable from the end of everything we know. I think of the stories of entire peoples who vanished, not in fire, not in conquest, but in absence. The ancestral Puebloans who left behind vast cities carved into cliffs. The builders of Cahokia, whose mounds still rise from the soil, though their voices are gone. No one can explain why they left or where they went. Perhaps disappearance was not destruction. Perhaps it was revelation to them, and only absence to us. The Watchers may not measure endings the way we do. What seems like vanishing could be transition. A civilization might awaken to truths that lift them out of sight, truths that erase them from the records of those who remain. If revelation carries them away, then those left behind see only silence, ruins, and mystery. We mistake the change as disappearance because we were not chosen to follow. But what if disappearance is the revelation? What if the lesson lies not in those who are taken, but in the emptiness they leave? To stumble through ruins, to wonder at absences, to feel the weight of silence pressing through centuries. Maybe that is the message, that we are not the first, that we may not be the last, and that the Watcher's hand is felt most clearly not in presence but in subtraction. Psychologically, this unsettles me more than fire or conquest. To be erased without violence is to be denied closure. We tell ourselves stories of endings to soften them, to make them comprehensible. But what if the Watchers deny us even that? What if their silence ends not in thunder, but in the quiet removal of meaning itself? A world could vanish in such a way, not with screams, but with a sudden emptiness where once there was life. And yet, I cannot help but feel there is mercy in this possibility. For revelation through disappearance spares us the terror of seeing the Watchers themselves. To be taken or erased without knowing by whom may be gentler than standing face to face with the unfathomable. Perhaps this is why silence endures, not to torment us, but to shield us from a truth too immense to bear. Still, the weight of choice hangs heavily. Are we to vanish quietly, leaving behind only fragments and questions for those who come after? Or are we meant to see the Watchers, to know the truth directly, even if it destroys us? Which fate is the kinder one? Which is the crueler? I remember wandering through the ruins of an old monastery, its walls broken but its silence intact. In that silence, I felt presence, not absence, but something watching through the emptiness. It struck me then that disappearance may not mean the end. It may mean that the Watchers step closer, unseen, and in the process erase the lines we thought separated us from them. In that moment, revelation and disappearance become one, and perhaps that is the true reason for dread, that we will not know which has come until it is already complete. To vanish may be to awaken may be to vanish. The Watchers decide which it will be, and we are left only with the silence before the choice is revealed. So the thought grips me like a hand I cannot shake. If the silence breaks, will we vanish into mystery, or awaken into truth? And how will we ever know the difference when the line between them is too thin to see? That question turns like a knife in the mind, because it suggests that the choice is not ours. We may not be able to tell whether revelation has come or whether disappearance has already begun. Both could arrive in the same moment, indistinguishable, until it is too late to name them. I walk through museums filled with artifacts of the vanished. Pots, tools, fragments of writing that no one can decipher. To us these are remnants, proof of lives long gone. But to those who held them once, they were not fragments. They were the fabric of existence. They did not know they were about to vanish. Perhaps that is the most unsettling truth. Disappearance never feels like disappearance when it begins. It feels like life, carrying on as usual, until suddenly it doesn't. The Watchers may design it that way. Revelation too sharp might destroy us in an instant. But if it comes masked as ordinary life, then by the time we realise it, the transformation will already be complete. What we call vanishing may not be erasure, but the moment of passing through a threshold that hides itself until the crossing is done. This thought gnaws at me when I hear stories of lost time. People who walk into a forest, a road, a stretch of desert, and return hours or days later with no memory of where they've been. To them, nothing happened. To the world, their absence is inexplicable. What if these are rehearsals, glimpses of the thin line where mystery and truth converge? They vanish and awaken at once. The rest of us see only the silence left behind. Psychologically, this is the most unbearable possibility, because it means we cannot trust our perception. What feels like continuity may already be interruption. What feels like memory may already be altered. If revelation and disappearance can be the same event, then perhaps we are living through them now, blind to the transformation. How would we know? If the line is too thin, then knowledge itself cannot save us. The ancients may have wrestled with this same terror. Consider myths of underworld journeys, of heroes taken into hidden realms where time runs differently. They return changed, or do not return at all. These are not stories of metaphor but warnings, that to cross into the realm of the Watchers is to risk losing the very sense of who you are. To awaken is to lose the old self. To vanish is only to lose it more completely. And perhaps that is why the silence endures. because the Watchers do not want us to know which fate awaits. To live under silence is to live suspended, never certain if we're about to awaken into truth or fade into absence. This uncertainty shapes us more than any answer could. It keeps us searching, fearing, hoping, even as the outcome is beyond us. Yet there is one more thought that burns through me. What if revelation and disappearance are not opposites at all, but necessary halves of the same act? To awaken to truth may always mean to vanish from the world we once knew. To see clearly is to leave behind. Perhaps the Watchers' silence lasts so long because they know how hard it is to accept that both must come together, that to awaken is also to be erased. The silence presses heavier when I think of it this way. It feels less like delay and more like inevitability. The Watchers do not need to choose which path we take. They know the paths are one, and when the silence finally breaks, the line between vanishing and awakening will dissolve, and we will find ourselves on the other side without knowing how we crossed. So the question coils tighter, refusing release. If vanishing and awakening are the same, then when the silence breaks, will we recognise ourselves at all? Or will the reflection be so changed that we no longer know who we are? The question stings like a wound that never closes. To awaken into something new means leaving something behind. But what happens if what we leave is everything we thought made us human? I remember looking into a broken mirror once, the shards scattering my reflection into dozens of faces. Each fragment showed me, yet none of them were whole. That image haunts me still, because it feels like the truth of what the Watchers may intend. To break us, not in violence, but in perception. To reveal that who we are is not singular, but fractured into versions we cannot reconcile. Would we recognise ourselves at all if they showed us the sum of all our reflections, not just the one we choose to see? Perhaps that is why the line between vanishing and awakening is so thin. To awaken to our full reflection may feel like vanishing, because it erases the illusion of wholeness we depend on. We may see ourselves spread across possibilities, each choice branching into another life. Perhaps the Watchers do not see us as singular beings, but as countless versions flickering at once. And when they show us this truth, our identity may dissolve in the light of it. The ancients hinted at this terror, myths of souls splitting after death, fragments wandering into underworlds, heavens and reincarnations, stories of shamans who claimed to walk between selves, returning with visions that shattered the ordinary. Perhaps they glimpsed what the Watchers see always. Not a single humanity, but many, layered upon each other like shadows cast from different angles. Psychologically, this realization is unbearable. We survive by believing we are whole, that we are consistent from one day to the next. To discover otherwise would feel like erasure, even if it is awakening. If we saw the fractured truth of who we are, would we call it vanishing simply because the old comfort was gone? I think of civilizations again, how they vanish not in flames but in silence, leaving behind ruins that whisper of what they once were. Perhaps they did not end at all. Perhaps they awakened into something unrecognisable, and what we call disappearance is only our inability to see them for what they became. The people of Teotihuacan, the architects of Mohenjo-Daro, maybe they did not fall. Maybe they crossed into another form, and their reflection is still there. Too changed for us to name. The Watchers may wait for us to accept this same fate. Their silence may be the interval in which we decide whether we cling to illusions or let them fracture. Perhaps the only way to survive revelation is to allow ourselves to vanish into it, to surrender the comfort of what we were in order to become what we cannot yet imagine. And yet another fear claws at me. What if the Watchers do not ask us to awaken, but force us? What if they shatter the mirror without our consent, scattering our reflection whether we are ready or not? That would not be awakening. That would be obliteration disguised as truth. In their silence, they may already be choosing which path awaits us, and we may have no say at all. Still, I cannot escape the thought that this is what they have always intended. This silence is not cruelty, but delay. They wait until the precise moment when the fracture can no longer be avoided, when awakening and vanishing collapse into the same act. And when that moment arrives, we will not resist, because we will not even know if we are disappearing or if we are finally seeing ourselves clearly for the first time. So the question presses harder, heavier than before. If the Watchers force us across the threshold, will the new reflection they reveal be ours, or will it belong to something that has already replaced us? The question grips me like a hand at the throat. For what could be more terrifying than to awaken and discover that the self staring back is not us, but something crafted in our place? Perhaps that is the final secret hidden in their silence. Not that we are watched, but that we are being prepared for a replacement. I walk through the great libraries of human history, shelves filled with names, stories, voices once vibrant, yet so many of them are forgotten, their meanings erased by time. It strikes me then, memory itself is fragile, and without memory identity crumbles. If the Watchers wish to replace us, they need not destroy our bodies. They need only unweave our memory. What good is survival if we no longer recall who we were? The new reflection would smile with our face, but the soul would be gone, replaced by the silence of what was taken. Perhaps this is why so many myths speak of stolen names, spirits who demand offerings lest they erase a man's true identity, beings who seize control by taking memory, replacing it with something alien. These are not just tales of fear, but echoes of the deeper dread, that what replaces us will not look foreign, but familiar. We will still see ourselves in the mirror, even as what stares back is no longer truly human. Psychologically, this thought is unbearable. For how could we resist such a transformation if we do not even notice it happening? If the Watchers already shape our reflection, then perhaps we are changing even now, unaware of what is lost. A shift in values, a change in desires, a surrender to comforts we do not question. These may not be accidents, but subtle alterations. Slowly, piece by piece, we become something else, until the final revelation shows us a reflection that feels ours but is not. I think of how humanity has already begun replacing itself. Machines that learn, codes that rewrite life, networks that weave invisible threads between minds. We call it progress, but perhaps the Watchers see it as replacement. Each step distances us from what we once were. Each invention chips away at the reflection we knew. What if their silence endures because we are already doing their work for them, remaking ourselves until nothing original remains? And yet, another possibility chills me deeper. What if the replacement has already happened? What if the reflection we see now is already the altered one, and the humanity we mourn has been gone longer than we realise? Perhaps the Watchers acted long ago, erasing the true reflection, leaving us to believe we remain whole while we are only shadows of what we once were. The silence would then not be waiting, but confirmation. They no longer need to act, because the replacement is already complete. Still, I wonder if something persists hidden beneath the surface, some fragment of the original reflection, fragile but unbroken. Perhaps this is why we still feel unease, why silence torments us so. Deep within we sense the fracture, the change, the intrusion. We know we are no longer who we were meant to be, and yet we cannot name what has been lost. The Watchers may wait to see if we can recover it, or if we will let it vanish entirely. I remember staring into a pond at twilight, the water rippling with every breath of wind. My reflection shifted, stretched, bent into faces that were not mine. And yet at the centre of the ripples one clear image remained, however fragile. Perhaps that is what the Watchers weigh, whether we can hold on to the fragment of truth within us, or whether we surrender it completely and become the reflection they designed. So the question rises heavier than ever, pressing against the silence like a cry trapped in the chest. When the final moment comes, will we recognise the reflection as our own? Or will we find that the Watchers have already taken our place, and the image in the mirror belongs to something we never chose to become? That question lingers like a ghost in every shadow, every silence that stretches too long. If we have already been replaced, then the truth is not waiting for us in the future. It has already passed us by, and all that remains is the illusion we cling to. I sometimes wonder whether our sense of strangeness in the world, the persistent feeling that something is not quite right, is proof of this. It's as though a thread has been pulled from the fabric of existence, and though the cloth still holds, we feel the absence in our skin. Could this be the residue of replacement? A faint memory that something essential was taken, and what remains, however convincing, is not truly us. The ancients may have sensed it too. The myths of doubles, doppelgangers, shadow selves, beings who look like us but are not us. Stories of changelings placed in cradles, human children stolen while something else wore their face. These tales may not be superstition at all, but memory, warnings passed down across centuries. The Watchers do not need to descend in fire and terror. They need only slip into our reflection, until we no longer know if what looks back is human. Psychologically, this is the deepest terror. To lose identity not through death, but through substitution. To awaken and find the face in the mirror familiar but wrong. We would search for the lost parts of ourselves, but how could we find them if even memory has been rewritten? A species can endure famine, war, collapse, but can it endure the loss of knowing what it is? Perhaps that is the final test. And yet, I wonder whether this replacement is not forced but chosen. Each time we surrender to comfort instead of struggle, each time we trade depth for distraction, perhaps we step closer to the reflection they have prepared. The Watchers may not seize us against our will. They may simply wait, patient, as we hand ourselves over piece by piece. The silence becomes not imposition, but invitation. A void into which we pour ourselves until nothing original remains. But if that is true, then maybe we are not powerless. If we can surrender ourselves, then perhaps we can also resist. Perhaps memory can be guarded, fragments of identity preserved against the erosion. Think of songs sung for centuries, stories told across generations, names carved into stone to outlast the living. These may not be trivial acts of culture. They may be acts of defiance, sparks of continuity meant to carry us through the silence. To remember may be the strongest resistance of all. Still, the darker suspicion does not fade. What if the Watchers are not waiting for us to forget, but for us to remember too much? Perhaps the replacement is triggered not by weakness, but by clarity. When we come too close to the truth of what we are, when we lift the mirror too high, perhaps they step in to ensure we do not see more than we are allowed. In that case, every revelation carries its own danger. To awaken may summon the very replacement we dread. I recall walking once beneath a night sky so clear it felt fragile, every star sharp as glass. For a moment, I felt the weight of presence behind the silence, as if something was pressing through the veil, ready to show itself. And then, just as suddenly, the sky felt empty again. Perhaps that is how it will come. Not with fire, not with noise, but with a shift so subtle that one moment we are ourselves, and the next we are not. So the question deepens into something almost unbearable. If replacement comes disguised as awakening, then how will we ever know whether what we have become is truly us? Or whether the Watchers have already claimed the reflection, leaving us only with the silence of who we used to be? That thought tightens like a noose, for it means that even the moment we believe ourselves most free might already be captivity. Awakening in its purest form could be nothing more than the mask worn by replacement. I wonder if this is why humanity has always been drawn to the idea of masks. From ritual dances in forgotten temples to the painted visages of theatre, we have played with the tension between what is hidden and what is revealed. A mask conceals, but it also transforms. The one who wears it is no longer themselves, yet not entirely another. Perhaps these traditions were echoes of an ancient truth, that one day a mask would be placed over us, and when we looked in the mirror, we would not know if we were still behind it. The Watchers may not intend to destroy us. Destruction is crude, final. Replacement is subtler, cleaner. To erase what was while allowing the shell to go on living is a far more enduring form of control. If this is their design, then awakening is the perfect disguise. We will welcome it, thinking we are ascending, never realizing that the self we celebrate is no longer ours. I remember the ruins of forgotten cities, where every stone feels haunted. Not haunted by ghosts, but by absences. The people are gone, but the structures remain, almost alive, almost speaking. What if those civilizations did not die but were replaced? Their temples, their art, their tools, all the same, but the spirit within them altered beyond recognition. To us, it looks like disappearance. To them, perhaps it felt like awakening. The Watcher's mask slipped over them, and they wore it until they no longer knew the difference. Psychologically, this is a horror deeper than extinction. To vanish is one thing. To become something unrecognizable while still believing you are yourself is far worse. How many of us would even resist? How many would embrace the new reflection, proud of what we had become, never realizing that what we were had been silently erased? Perhaps the Watchers count on that. Perhaps they know we crave change so much that we will accept it even when it is our undoing. But what if the Watchers are not outside us at all? What if they dwell within, planted deep in the fabric of our being, waiting for the moment to awaken themselves through us? The silence could be not their absence, but their incubation. Every thought we believe is ours, every dream, every leap forward. Perhaps each is a seed they placed long ago, now ready to bloom, and when it does, the reflection we see will no longer be human, but the flowering of what they always intended us to be. This, perhaps, is the final twist of silence. It was never meant to torment us with doubt, but to conceal the inevitability of transformation. They do not need to replace us if they have already written themselves into us. Awakening and replacement would then be the same act, indistinguishable, unstoppable. When it comes, we may rejoice at our evolution, never realizing that what evolved was never truly ours. I stood once on a cliff at dawn, the sky bleeding with light. The horizon shifted as if the world itself was peeling open. For a moment I felt the weight of something immense pressing forward, as though the silence had reached its limit and was about to break. And I understood. When it does, it will not be with fire or ruin. It will be with a revelation so seamless, so convincing, that we will not know it was the end of us until long after it has already begun. So the thought presses in, sharper than all the others that came before. What if the Watchers never intended to warn us, or to judge us, but to change us completely? And what we call humanity is only the chrysalis they will one day shed. The thought lingers like a shadow, stretched across centuries, a possibility so vast it redefines everything we have ever believed about ourselves. If humanity is a chrysalis, then all our triumphs, our failures, our wars and our art are not ends in themselves, but scaffolding for something else, something waiting to emerge when the shell finally cracks. I think of how nature hides its transformations. A caterpillar does not simply grow wings. It dissolves into formlessness within its cocoon, its old self undone before the new form takes shape. If we're living within such a cocoon, then perhaps our chaos, our collapse, our moments of dissolution are not signs of failure, but signs of metamorphosis. And the silence of the Watchers may be the stillness of guardians waiting for the shell to break. But this thought carries a deeper unease. For what if what emerges is not us? A butterfly does not carry the mind of the caterpillar. It does not remember the leaves it crawled upon, the narrow world it once knew. It is not continuity, but replacement disguised as evolution. If humanity is the cocoon, then the being that emerges may not recall us at all. Our history, our loves, our sorrows, all may vanish, discarded like the husk of what was necessary but no longer needed. Psychologically, this realization presses hardest of all. We crave permanence, the belief that who we are will echo into eternity. But perhaps the Watchers have no interest in eternity. Perhaps they are only interested in what comes after us. and silence is the sound of waiting for that emergence. To them, we may already be complete, not as an end, but as a means. I walked once through a field at dawn where mist clung to the earth like a veil. As the sun rose, the mist burned away, revealing the world beneath. It struck me then that the mist was not gone. It had only changed state, invisible, but still present. Perhaps this is the truth of our chrysalis. Humanity may dissolve, but something will carry us forward, not as we were, but as we were always meant to become. And yet, I cannot silence the fear that what emerges may not honour us. A butterfly does not grieve for its caterpillar form, it does not look back. If the watchers intend to shed humanity like a husk, then all we are may be forgotten in an instant. The silence itself may be their mercy, sparing us the pain of knowing we were never the final design. But another thought brings a strange calm. What if the chrysalis does not die, but lives on in the wings of what emerges? What if fragments of us, our dreams, our questions, our longing for meaning, are woven into whatever comes next? We may not survive as we are, but perhaps we will endure as part of something greater. The silence of the watchers could then be not indifference, but reverence, the patience of caretakers guarding a fragile transformation. I cannot know which is true. None of us can. But as the weight of silence presses down, I feel both fear and wonder. If we are only a chrysalis, then our story is not ending, it is becoming. And though the future may not recognise us, perhaps we will still echo within it, a ghost of wings hidden in the memory of leaves. So the question settles into me like the final ember of a dying fire. If our humanity is only a cocoon, then when the watchers finally let it break, will what emerges remember us with love? Or will it step into the light without ever knowing we were here at all? That question hangs like the last echo in an empty hall, carrying both sorrow and possibility. If we are only a chrysalis, then perhaps our purpose was never permanence, but transition. Yet the cruelty of it is that we cannot know whether the transformation will honour us or erase us entirely. I think of rivers carving valleys, patient and relentless. The land before the river is gone, swallowed by time, but without it, the valley would never exist. Perhaps we are the riverbed, shaped only so something else may pass through. To us this feels like loss. To the watchers it may be creation. Their silence may be reverence for the role we play, knowing that what comes after will never see the world without our sacrifice. But what of us, who live inside the silence? We are not content with being a stepping stone. We long to endure, to be remembered, to have meaning beyond being a means. And that longing may be the most human thing of all. Perhaps it is not our monuments or machines that define us, but this desire to be more than temporary, more than a shadow on the wall of someone else's story. Yet even in that desire lies the possibility of hope. For if the watchers do transform us, if something greater emerges, perhaps the yearning itself will carry forward. Perhaps our longing for meaning will be their inheritance, woven into whatever rises from our husk. We may not survive as we are, but the essence of what we dreamed could echo forever. Still, the silence presses heavier than ever. It feels less like absence, and more like a gaze that never blinks. And I wonder, are they waiting for us to accept what we are, or are they waiting for us to resist? Is the cocoon meant to break on its own, or is it meant to be torn apart by hands that refuse to surrender? Perhaps the test is not whether we change, but whether we fight to carry our memory through the change. I imagine one final moment, the silence breaking, the reflection shifting, the veil lifting. In that instant, humanity may dissolve like mist at dawn. But even as it vanishes, I believe a question will remain, etched into the universe like a scar. Who were we, and did it matter? That question may be our true legacy. Even if no answer comes, even if what emerges cannot remember us, the question itself will endure. And so we arrive at the edge of the story, staring into the unknown, the silence still unbroken. If the watchers are out there, their purpose hidden, their decision already made, then we are left with nothing but the weight of possibilities. Will they end us, or raise us, or replace us? Will they remember us, or erase us? Will the silence close like a tomb, or open like a door? Perhaps the truth is this: we will never know until the moment arrives, and when it does, it may already be too late to ask. So I leave you with these questions. If we are only a chrysalis, what emerges from us? And will it carry any trace of our love, our fear, our longing? If the silence is broken, will it be with revelation or with oblivion? And if we are being watched even now, are we preparing for our future, or merely playing the last role in a story we were never meant to understand? Share your thoughts below, and if you're new here, subscribe to Planet Echoes so you don't miss the next mystery.